Hello, Garland Nixon here, back with author and professor and all around smart person, Dr. Radhika Desai, and we're going to talk about the India Pakistan conflict. I hope it's not that, amongst other things. Let's talk. Oops. Sorry about that. I've got too many things running at the same time here.
Sure.
Oh, there we go. Oops. Sorry about that. Oh, there we go. All right, there we go. Yeah, I'm running this on several platforms, so every now and then I have too many windows open, and I'm like, "Why am I hearing myself?" And I'm hearing the show, but I think we've got it straight here. All right, let's
Great.
go. There's the India Pakistan dispute is very very interesting. One of the things that I think happened that immediately caught my eye was after the terrorist attack. The defense minister of Pakistan came out and said, we've been doing the dirty work for the West for a long time, and it hasn't benefited us. Notwithstanding all of my criticisms of Narendra Modi, and they are legion, they are many, Pakistan has been a cat's paw. The government, I don't think they have a government, to be quite honest. They have a military. It's a military dictatorship. Has been a cat's paw for British and intelligence, U.S. intelligence for so long, and I think that's at the heart of this. That's at the heart of this problem, that this is another instance where Western intelligence meddling and evil deeds are creating some very dangerous situations. Your thoughts on this, Dr. Desai?
Well, I think that's definitely true. I think Tariq Ali said somewhere very memorably, it sticks in my mind. He said, Pakistan is the condom that the United States used to enter Afghanistan. So you can see that, and also going back to the days of partition and soon thereafter, essentially, Pakistan seemed to float into the US orbit and India into the Soviet orbit. And, within limits, of course, India was a non-aligned nation and so on, but still, the insecurity that the Pakistanis felt throughout independence. Remember, Pakistan's insecurity stems from many things, including the fact that when it was first formed, of course, it was formed of two territories separated by hundreds of miles of India in between. And because of that, of course, it sort of floated to the US side. So the Cold War was always been a factor in the South Asian situation. At the same time, it's also the case that in recent times, that is to say, probably since the last decade, maybe more than a decade, the US interest in Pakistan has been considerably lowered. As its involvement in Afghanistan has gone down. And as you know, of course, about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, the US withdrew from Afghanistan very ignominiously. And before that also, its involvement was lowered. So the Pakistan-US connection has weakened. And of course, into this space or this connection has been replaced by a new connection between Pakistan and China. And so again, what we are and that connection, of course, remains quite important. And as you know, Kashmir is a territory in which not only is part of it claimed by Pakistan, but there is another part to the eastern side that is Aksai Chin, that is claimed by China. So India has border disputes in the Kashmir region with at least these two powers. So it's a complex situation. As I say, undoubtedly, the Western powers are to a great extent responsible. I mean, going back to the partition itself, which they were happy to see, although I wouldn't blame it entirely on them, but which they were happy to see, because otherwise India would have been the largest country in the world. I mean, just imagine a country that encompassed present day India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. I mean, it would have been enormous. And so they were happy to see that. So they have always been involved. But I think that lately their involvement has lessened. And this is partly the reason why the Trump administration, as well as the Starmer administration, have both sort of made very vague motherhood and apple pie type statements about, how we want there to be no war, de-escalation, we will help mediate. Everybody, all the Western powers are basically now saying that they want to de-escalate, mediate, reach a resolution. Of course, none of this, means that they will be successful, of course, and not just because of the situation of the last month or so, but the underlying situation is the position of Kashmir, which has never been resolved. There's a bone of contention between India and Pakistan for a very, very long time, as I said, going back to 1948. So, a year after independence, India and Pakistan had already fought a war over Kashmir. So, unless the Kashmir issue is resolved, these sorts of situations are likely to recur. And one final thing, I mean, India and Pakistan are, of course, two nuclear armed powers, as people have been saying in the context of current events. And a while back, I forget exactly when it was, but maybe in the early, about 20, 25 years ago, The Economist magazine called South Asia the most dangerous region of the world for that reason, because not only are India and Pakistan nuclear powers, but they have deeply rooted animosities, they have border disputes, and they are right next to each other. So,
Well, wait a minute here. I'm getting a little bit of a feedback. I don't know what's going on here. Okay. Can you hear me okay? You can hear me fine? Okay. Pakistan is interesting. Very interesting country. And I don't say that in necessarily a positive way, in that they had what was his name, Musharraf, for so long, and a military dictator. And while the U.S. runs around the world and says, "Oh, we hate dictators," Pakistan's been an area where the U.S. and Britain have benefited to some extent from their ability to have a dictatorship in there. The whole Imran Khan controversy, right? Imran Khan's in Moscow. He wants to be non-aligned. It comes out that the U.S. basically replaced him. He sends information out that says, "Here's the data. Here's the document that shows that the U.S. had us replaced." And the government says, "Well, you're sharing state secrets. You got to go to jail." And the level of instability rises. Here's something else that has come out that immediately jumped. Something else that jumped out to me. The Pakistani Defense Forces or whatever come out and say, "Well, if there was a war, we really couldn't fight it because we've sent all of our equipment to Ukraine." Something I had no idea. Pakistan has sent all of their stuff to Ukraine. And then it dawned on me, okay, that I guess was what replacing Imran Khan was about. So they could access the more military material, war material to send to Ukraine. But apparently no one, Pakistan, we knew South Korea was sending shells. We knew all these other places, but we didn't realize that Pakistan was sending their shells to Ukraine and apparently maybe even Israel.
I would find that very okay. I mean, first of all, if I had not heard that news, but from what you say, it seems to me that if Pakistan was sending arms to Ukraine, it's possible that they were selling them to somebody who was then sending them to Ukraine, maybe the United States. Because remember, in terms of supplying Ukraine with arms, the West has found itself very handicapped because they don't have the capacity to produce arms at the pace that would be necessary to arm Ukraine to the extent. So I think that it's possible that they have been shopping around for other people's unused arms. I mean, I don't put it beyond the realm of possibility. But Israel, I would find that very hard to believe. Israel and India, in fact, have been coming very close together over the last couple of decades in particular, certainly since the first Modi government. That's interesting. That's really interesting. And what's this website? I don't see them.
This is Euromaidan Press, but if you search, it comes up on a number. I mean, it's not just one site.
Sure.
If you search it comes up in a number of places.
So, and does it say that, Pakistan is sending them or selling them to somebody who is sending them?
Well, there's just a number of places that's coming out that
Yeah, but
you can search it. Here's one, Indie TV, Castract, Pakistan sold weapons worth $364 million to Ukraine. I mean, like I said, you'll look, there's a number of places there. Um,
Yeah, and I think that again, selling your weapons is a different. I mean, it's a commercial proposition. It doesn't necessarily say that in Pakistan is aligned there. Although I don't put it past the realm of possibility. Maybe you've thought more about this particular point than I have. But I will say one other thing, which is of course that the United States is very eager to wrench Pakistan out of its deepening embrace with China, because as you know, there is a section of the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, that goes through Pakistan. There's a China-Pakistan economic corridor. There are various construction activities and so on. And the FT is reporting, I read a day or so ago, I think that, of course, increasingly, although Pakistan used to be a big arms purchaser from purchasing arms from the United States, it has recently shifted to purchasing arms from China. And that raises another interesting possibility, that it is possible that the United States has persuaded Pakistan, or the new government that it is happy to see there in place of the Imran Khan government, has persuaded the new government to sell arms to Ukraine because they are US arms, that they are compatible with US arms that are other US arms that are being supplied either by the United States itself or by some NATO powers, etc.
Interesting. What about the suspicions that this was the terrorist attack, the suspicions that, as I said, that the defense minister implied quickly that, no, we've been doing the dirty work for the West, that there are forces in the West who wanted to see some level of destabilization, maybe in the context of the great power conflict, be it opening another front against Russia or China, whatever the case may be. What about those suspicions? Which I would have to say the defense minister's comments would have to point in that direction. Who do you think it's possible? Who would want it and why?
At the moment, I suspect that again, the serving defense minister, I believe, of Pakistan has said that the terrorist attack in Pahalgam was staged by the Indian government in order to raise tensions within. So I would say, of course, imperial powers are always happy to see other powers in conflict with one another. But I think that the greater concern in South Asia at this point is that, of course, in the present context, anti-India feeling in Pakistan and anti-Pakistan feeling in India are being inflamed to an astonishing degree. I mean, it creates a very dangerous situation. And I see in the newspaper that just the latest, with all these live feeds that various papers are running, that the Pakistan, like the Indian government, I think the Indian government, you see, what you have to understand about these terror attacks is that one of the things that is really interesting about this terror attack is that, as you know, in 2019, the Indian, or as some people may know, in 2019, the Modi government, which is, of course, historically anti-Muslim, anti-Pakistan, etc., they ended the special status, special constitutional status that the state of Jammu and Kashmir had from independence until 2019, on the grounds that the special status was being abused by essentially the
let me ask you this. We're having some audio problems. Can I ask you this? And this usually helps. Can I ask you to sign out and then sign back in? Okay, just click leave studio and then click your link and come right back in. That usually clears up these kind of audio problems.
Okay, we'll leave studio.
Sorry about that. We're having some audio issues, and usually this usually fixes it, because I know it's kind of difficult. I saw some people in the chat saying this is kind of difficult, and I wasn't sure whether it was simply my headphones. I tried to adjust my headphones, etc. Okay. Hello?
Right. So,
All right, we're all clear now. So if that comes back, we can do that. But right now, we're good. So that usually fixes. Okay, continue.
yeah, so the one thing is that the special status of Kashmir was ended on the grounds that this was going to improve the law and order situation there. Of course, the way in which the special status was taken away, when it was declared, the government had declared curfew, it had arrested all sorts of political leaders. So basically, what this government imagines is that simply by increasing the level of repression in Kashmir, by creating a climate of fear, that it is going to get rid of the terrorism problem. In reality, of course, to the extent that there is a terrorism problem that is homegrown, this kind of treatment is bound to increase it. In Kashmir, there has definitely been a local insurgency, and definitely elements in the Pakistan state have, at various points in the past, supported it. All of these things are known. So, but the Indian government was not going to resolve this by increasing the level of repression in Kashmir. Over the last few years, since the abrogation of the special status of Kashmir, the government has advertised tourism, the increased tourism in Jammu and Kashmir, which is a very beautiful place, as you may have heard, as testimony to its success, the success of its strategy. And so, what's remarkable about these terrorist attacks is that the government was caught napping. I mean, why was it not able to prevent this terrorist attack? Why was there? Apparently, there was a military unit stationed exactly in that spot where the terrorist attack occurred, and which was closed down just like in January. And so essentially the government was caught napping, and the possibility that this represents the terror attack in Pahalgam represents a failure of the Indian state and the failure of Indian state to organize security in a place where it is encouraging tourism from all over India and abroad and whatnot, is further underlined by the fact that on the whole, the Prime Minister has not really touched this with a barge pole. He didn't visit the place. He didn't, console the survivors. All he has done so far is use this to campaign for elections, which are due in Bihar this year. So, So to me, this is more likely a result of the certain problems of administering Kashmir within India. And, even if it was the case that the Indian government had concrete proof that Pakistani agencies were involved in this particular terror attack, I think asking for some kind of joint or international or neutral and impartial investigation would have done the trick. But if, as some reporter or other pointed out, or some commentator pointed out, if the government had actually asked for a neutral or joint investigation, and if the Pakistani state, knowing that it was involved and not willing the facts to come out, had responded by saying, no, we don't want this, then the ball would have been in their court. But the Indian government has instead decided to take this the strike option. It has now essentially exercised that option. It has also given the name to the operations called Operation Sindoor. It's a very emotive name that it has been given, because the idea is that it is avenging the death of the husbands of some 25 odd, 2 dozen odd Indian women. And it's true that it seems that the husbands were killed and not the women. But given that it's a kind of honeymoon location, a lot of these young women were newly married. So all of this has, of course, played to the heartstrings of the country and so on. So they're trying to create this emotive anti-Pakistan. And of course, in the Indian context, anti-Pakistan propaganda invariably becomes anti-Muslim propaganda. And people forget that Muslims are a very large minority in India. About 13 to 15% of the Indian population is Muslim. It is not a small percentage. So if you create this kind of war situation, you're going to see, it's already very bad that this 13-15% of the Indian population has had to live through a decade plus of a government that is ruled, a government of a party that has been anti-Muslim from yonks. And of course, today, since 9/11, the pervasive international Islamophobia also plays right into the hands of these forces in India.
Okay, let me try something. I'm just going to plop you out, plop you back in. Say something.
Hello, how are you?
Okay, well, we got a little bit, not too bad right now. We'll do the best we can. If we need to jump out and back in again, we'll do it, but
Sure.
we'll see how things work. You bring something up important, and that is, as what's his name said, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, right? And here's what I mean. People who are in the West who are looking for, conspiracy, say MI6 or the CIA was behind it, right? People who, look at Pakistan's, instability and their long support for terrorism in a lot of areas say, well, clearly the Pakistan intelligence and government was behind that. But you bring another important possibility, and that is that it is in fact organic, that in fact that there are people in the Kashmir region, there are groups in the Kashmir region who are very unhappy with the way things are, who are very angry at the Indian government, who have in fact experienced repression, who may have, without the support of outside people, this is the one thing that's never accepted as a possibility, the most simple answer. And sometimes it's true that just people, go ahead.
So one of the interesting things to know is that the Kashmiri economy, despite the bragging of the Modi government, has actually been very bad. It's not working for ordinary Kashmiris. And as I say, the level of repression is increased. Also, historically, because of the special status of Kashmir, non-Kashmiris were not allowed to buy land there, which was a way of, keeping it in the hands of local Kashmiris, both Hindu and Muslim. But this law has now been considerably diluted because if you are if you've lived there for like 10 years, 15 years, something like that, you can essentially get a domicile certificate that allows you to purchase land. So all of these things have been seen as unnecessarily provocative without resolving any serious day-to-day problem of ordinary Kashmiris. And so tourism, insofar as it was working, tourism was a big success. And the last thing you want if you're an ordinary Kashmiri is for the tourists to stop coming. So the entire Kashmiri civil society, all the major political parties, all sorts of groups have been holding demonstrations condemning the terror incidents, saying we are against the terrorists, etc. And so, so that's one thing I wanted to say in response to your point. But the second thing I wanted to say, of course, is that, it's very ironic that living as we do in a time where a large part of the difficulties that the world is having, the militarism, the wars in Ukraine and so on, are in good part a result of the fact that Western powers are losing power. They're losing power and influence. Western countries, which have become used to dominating the world over the last couple of 100 years, are losing their purchase on developments. And as a consequence, they are acting more and more desperately and in a militarized fashion. But so just at the time when they are losing their power and influence, we have the proliferation of conspiracy theories that seize their hand in everything. But actually, it's quite possible. I mean, the real dangers right now are that, in fact, that the West, even if it wants India and Pakistan not to fight, it may lose its capacity to control the situation.
Interesting. And that is important because we've gotten to a point where and I know a lot of people like this who everything that happens, the ruling elite, MI6, CIA, are omnipotent. Everything that happens, well, that's exactly, they make no errors. If something happens that seems like, boy, they really would want it to happen, they say, yeah, that's exactly what you really would want. They want you to think. It's really 3D chess. So they give them this omnipotence, and they say the government really wants this. The government controls everything. There's nothing that ever happens. If someone slips on a banana peel on the street, yes, that was the CIA planted that banana peel so they would slip, and then of course there's reverberations from that. Now, that being said, we'll continue to watch this situation and see how it unfolds. There's been strikes. Let's hope that this doesn't continue to expand, because it could be really bad news for the world. Tariff.
Can I make one point
Sure,
before we go to
go ahead. Sure,
just
yes.
a quick point, but I think it's an important one given what we've discussed so far. And that is that, I mean, look, I could be wrong, and if the people who are saying that there's a conspiracy theory actually show some definite proof, I will be very interested. I'm not saying that, just because in this instance I don't believe that there is a conspiracy, that doesn't mean that I don't believe that there are ever conspiracies, and there can be, even in this instance, be one. So I will be waiting and watching. But I think that at the present moment, it seems as though the Western countries really they have their hands full with a whole bunch of other emergencies and problems, and I don't particularly think they want to see a war in South Asia. But they are not going to, and their urgings to de-escalate, etc. I mean, fine, they'll have some effect, but the most effective powers in the present context are going to be China and Russia. Interestingly, they are, of course, two powers who are very close together. What was that partnership without limits that President Xi and President Putin talked about some years ago now already? And of course, they're both economic, political, and geopolitical cooperation has been growing massively over the last many years. And at the same time, India has a special reliance on Russia. China has a special relationship with Pakistan. And at the same time, India cannot also discount the importance of China. I mean, India imports a lot from China, etc., etc. So India has already been drawn into the sort of wider sinosphere, if we may say, which is created simply by the fact that China is just such a big and important manufacturer. So for all these reasons, I think that I would look more to China and Russia than to, as far as the resolution of the situation is concerned, than to Western powers. But let's go on to tariffs.
Yes, and in fact, President Xi and President Putin are meeting. President Xi, it seems to be maybe they changed their schedule for President Xi to get there earlier or stay longer. They're having meetings. I would suspect that somewhere on this agenda is going to be this Pakistan India dust up, shall we say. And in fact, the Russians, I'm told that the Russians have been working, night and day to try their best to repair the China-India relationship, or at least to mitigate the friction there. And, I don't know if this in a way, in a very paradoxical kind of way, this is something that could be used to do that if Russia and China are able to intervene in a way to satisfy the aggrieved parties here. It could be something that could be used to help repair the relationship between China and India, notwithstanding, again, the proliferation of anti-China propagation in India. Of anti-China with the propaganda.
Yeah. No, sure. And as I say, I think that the Modi administration would have loved it if it could afford to take a militantly anti-China stand, but it simply can't. It is, as I say, it's so reliant on China for many things. So the Modi administration would also have loved to be able to take a more pro-Western stance, including on Ukraine, but of course India's dependence on Russian weapons historically, and also today Russian oil prevents it from, people in India. This is dressed up as what is it called? It's not called non-alignment; it's called multi-alignment.
Yes.
So it's dressed up as that. But quite frankly, India simply can't afford to pay the high prices of oil that it would need to pay were it not getting cheap Russian oil. And also, of course, many of Modi's closest friends, his crony capitalists, who are some of the richest and most powerful men in India, they benefit from buying cheap Russian oil and refining it and then selling it onwards to other powers.
Yeah, they're loving. Oh boy, that's the thing. They are loving these sanctions. They're probably the ones pushing against. What's interesting? That's interesting. Sergei Lavrov the other day said, "No, I'm not interested in lifting the sanctions." A lot of Russians, because they've been able to replace um, Western companies with indigenous Russian companies. The money stays there. It's been benefiting them. What's interesting is there are a lot of that the U.S. puts these massive sanctions against Russia, and there are numerous parties who, including most of Russia, who has greatly benefited from these sanctions. And so now that they've
I
got the
think
sanctions on, and they're saying, oh, we may work with Russia to, and one of the things we'll offer is sanctions relief. And the Russians are like, not so fast. The Indians are like, no, we want the sanctions relief. We may go to war if there's a sanctions relief.
that's right. We want your sanctions. No, but you know what's really interesting is that, of course, Trump didn't start these sanctions, but the fact is, Trump's tariff war. Somebody joked that Trump's tariff war on China is going to make China great again, not make America great again. Because, I mean, historically, we have seen this, every time the West has essentially imposed any kind of tariffs, like on Huawei or any kind of sanctions on Huawei in the past and so on, these companies and the Chinese government working together have simply overcome them. Remember when they tried, essentially got everybody to cancel their contracts with Huawei and not sell chips to Huawei and so on. Within like less than a year, Huawei introduced some magical new phone. I mean, I don't know enough about phone technology to tell you what was nice about it, but the whole world sort of sat up and looks and wow. And the same thing is going to happen with these sanctions, with the trade restrictions. And as we were talking, if you want to segue into tariffs, I mean, yeah. So there is now talk of China and United States sitting down and in trade talks. I mean, Trump did this last time as well, mind you. Remember, he first declared, trade war with China. Then he wanted to do a deal and what have you. So this seems to be his modus operandi. You sort of begin by pummeling your opponent as hard as you can, softening them up, and then say, okay, we are going to do a deal. But of course, after more than a decade of, in fact, throughout the 21st century, going back to George Bush Jr.'s steel and aluminium tariffs and Obama's pivot to Asia, and then, of course, Trump Mark I, and his whole China show, which lasted a couple of years, as you remember. And then Biden continuing those sanctions, what is it, the narrow yard, high walls strategy and all of that thing. And now we have Trump too. And through all this time, I think China's resilience has actually grown. So today, China is speaking from a position of greater strength. Meanwhile, the United States and US governments have done practically nothing to strengthen their economy, to strengthen their innovative capacities, to strengthen their technological or investment capacities, etc. So in this context, the United States will be bargaining from a much weaker position compared to, say, a decade ago.
I think you're right. And now what Donald Trump will do is, we know Donald Trump, just like with the Houthis, when things aren't going well, he declares victory. And he just says, the Houthis have capitulated. They're like, no, we haven't. What are you talking about? Yes, they called me and said, we give, uncle. And they're like, nah, actually not, actually, that's a great advantage Donald Trump has. His, shall we say, ambivalence about, making truthful statements or whatever. And that is that he can just say, I mean, it's actually, a powerful asset for someone like Donald Trump, because you can't corner him. Any corner you corner him right now. Normally, I would say the U.S. is in deep and serious trouble because anyway, the only way out of this tariff war is to lose, is to say to China, we give, okay, because China said, no, we're not going to give, we'll see who gives. But the strength of Donald Trump, oddly enough, is that he can go to China, ask them first for a deal, make a deal where China gets the benefit of the doubt here and China looks good, and then just come out and say, we completely won, China gave up, and even if China says, no, we didn't, we don't know what he's talking about, he'll ignore it. So that's a very odd strength of his. not having an attachment to reality, to creating his own
That's
narrative.
a good
In
way
a
of
way,
putting
though, doesn't that go back to Karl Rove in a different way? Remember Karl Rove saying, we'll create our own reality, and while you're chasing after that one, we'll create another one. Donald Trump does it in a different kind of way, if you know what I mean. So I think it may not happen, but I think there's a way out for the Trump administration, and they may be looking for it right now, meeting in Switzerland.
it. Okay, so first of all, I completely agree with you that, I mean, I think you put it very well. He has a difficult relationship with reality, and it is not unconnected with the Karl Rove, Karl Rove to Ron Susskind will make the reality. You guys write about it. Great. That's what they said. But actually, I think that, what happens, when, you said you can't corner Trump because one day he'll say one thing. And, there was also that thing, he said, you tell him something, if you tell him, didn't you say that you were going to, like end the war the first day you were elected, end the Ukraine war the first day you were elected? He'll say something like, "Oh, did I say that?" He says this, so he, and I think I read somewhere, I think maybe it was some columnist in the FT said something very interesting. He said, Donald Trump doesn't say what he thinks, he says what he likes, which is a really interesting distinction.
Yes.
It makes you think. But the point is that actually, if you can't corner somebody, if you can't hold them to what they said in the past, if you can't even embarrass them by what they said in the past, then actually what happens to that relationship? Think about it. If you have a friend like that, you try to corner him, you say, didn't you say that? You said this. But after a while, what do? You distance themselves. You can't actually have a relationship with someone who has no stable core. And that's what Trump is. He seems to have no stable core. So yes, he's going into this, and this, I'm going to come to my big point about this tariff war. So, it seems as though now a pattern is emerging in which Trump will do a deal, and as you say, he will call a failure a success. And so on for home consumption. And I'm sure some people, particularly those particularly among those who form his sort of, most committed social base, will believe him. Although even many of them will start disbelieving him after a while, if this is going to keep up for a long time. But anyway, that's what he'll do. But overall, in the world as a whole, I think that this behavior is going to do is it's going to, all countries will take whatever deal they get if they can. But in the long run, they will be making plans to cut the United States out of their dealings. They will make relations with other countries. They will trade with other countries. They will invest with other countries, and so on. They will largely cut out the United States. So the result of this war, this trade war, whose biggest effect, whose most pervasive effect, and whose most lasting effect is to create an atmosphere of unpredictability as far as relations with the United States are concerned. And that is going to lead countries to essentially, so obviously, China doesn't want even its companies even to suffer short-term pain. So China will go into this negotiation with a view, as any sensible government should, with a view to minimizing the short-term pain. But in the long run, I don't think this is China will be looking to essentially replace its ties with the United States with other ties.
I think you're right. It's like a relationship where two people are together, and at some point, let's say their finances are so linked, one person says, I want to leave this person, but I can't afford to do it right now. I'm going to start putting money aside. I'm going to start preparing so that it may take me a couple years, but they have made the decision that this partner of theirs is unstable. Now, could that be a romantic relationship? Yes, but it could also be a business relationship, which I know of an instance of someone who had a business relationship with a person, but they were so intertwined they couldn't leave. I know this of someone. They were so intertwined they couldn't get out. Yeah. And they started making plans, and it took them 5 years. And five years later, they announced to the person, I'm going to sell my part of the business. I'm moving on. I want to do other things with my family, blah, blah, blah. They had been plotting for 5 years to move on because they couldn't just walk away from the business. And so I think that's part of it. Things can happen that creates and this is the thing, a business partner, where the business partner says, right now I can't walk away like I'd like to. but I'm going to
Yeah.
start my prepper. I would argue, for instance, Russia in 2014 or maybe even 2008, the Budapest summit, where they said, eventually this thing's going to come to a head in Georgia and or Ukraine, and we better start preparing now. And they didn't say to the West, we're going to prepare now. They didn't even say to their own people, we're going to prepare now. But they started maybe unboxing some of the military industrial complex, industrial places that had been mothballed during the Soviet Union, kind of reaching back to the legacy of the Soviet Union, starting to set things up for this in the long run. And I think when they heard that speech in 2008, it was, we know what's coming, we better prepare. And I think the Chinese, just from an economic perspective, we're talking now, not military, that's a whole nother conversation that is valid, but from an economic perspective, saying the US is small enough as far as our export market that it wouldn't crush us, but it would be a problem that we don't want. It would be instability that we don't want. But we got to get ready to get the heck out of here, because they are a loose cannon they're a burr under our saddle, shall we say. And I think that's where we are now. And I don't think there's any turning back from that.
No, and there's a couple of other things. So, Trump has, of course, softened. Well, he started by imposing these blanket tariffs. Then within a couple of days, he basically said he's going to put them on pause for 90 days or whatever that was, except for a few, and except for the ones on China. And we don't know what's going to happen at the end of 90 days. But remember, he did it after markets threw a tantrum. On top of that, all the CEOs who he constantly meets with and so on are probably telling him, don't do this, etc., etc. And I'm sure that they will have an influence. But I think that at the end of the day, the real issue for the United States is, how did Trump even get elected? Like, how did this guy who is an outsider, who is not very credible, who is, all these things, how did he get elected? He got elected because there is a profound political crisis in the United States where the entire political establishment of both the major parties have been discredited. The Republican Party simply happened to be taken over by a non-establishment force, a new force, and namely Trump. And then they have nominally won the elections, but the Republican Party establishment is destroyed. So, and this is where I will link up with another thing, which is, when Biden was elected, all of the United States elite, the chattering classes heaved a sigh of relief saying, well, he was an aberration. But the fact that he got reelected and the Democrats didn't, Biden didn't get a second term, Harris didn't win, actually says that it is Biden who was the aberration.
Yes.
And therefore, this type, and Trump, I think I've been saying this at various places, but my line on Trump is that Trump, of course, got elected by telling American people that he's going to solve their crisis. But in reality, he's not an agent. He is a symptom of the crisis. He's not going to solve the crisis. He's simply going to be a symptom of the crisis. He will be buffeted about by all the different forces that make up the crisis. And so essentially the United States is in for a very rough ride. And the question is whether their trading partners are willing to be sort of, buffeted about along with the United States, and obviously not. Like the US and like Trump, who listens to his constituency, namely the big CEOs, the Chinese government, which is responsible for running very effectively a very large and complex economy, is going to listen to everybody, each one of their companies and state-owned enterprises and whoever, who is experiencing difficulties as a result of these, what is it, 145% tariffs. So they are going to be working with them to try to find ways out. And I have no doubt that the Chinese government is going to these talks with an agenda which has been shaped by the interests of these companies and therefore the interests of the whole economy and of the Chinese people. The Trump administration, at best, if it's thinking of anybody, will be thinking only about a small number of really rich CEOs and not really about ordinary Americans who are going to be paying high prices, who are, and through those high prices, they will also be paying taxes, in the sense that part of the high prices they will be paying will be the tariffs, which will constitute revenue for the government, if they do at all. because the other option is Americans stop buying these high-priced items, in which case there will be no tariff revenue. So, and of course, Trump is using this idea of tariffs and tariff revenues also as a sort of part of his discourse on reducing income taxes and corporate taxes. So that's going to be a really interesting thing. Whenever Congress arrives at it, we will probably be discussing it. Yeah.
Well, I've made the argument that people interpret the MAGA movement as a Trump movement, and it wasn't. It wasn't at all. 2008, what happened? You had two branches. You had left, which was a what was it called? Occupy Wall Street, which was died. It went anarchist and just died quickly. You had right, which was called what? The Tea Party.
Yes.
And what were they angry about? The bailouts. They were economically crushed by 2008, kicked out of their homes. They were furious. And they put a bunch in 2010. They had the quote Tea Party take over in Congress, and they put all of these people in, Joe Walsh, people like that. And what did they do? They didn't change Washington. Washington changed them, and they were furious. And what happened? Donald Trump comes along and commandeered the Tea Party. The same people. This was the Tea Party that Trump grabbed, commandeered it and said, I'm your Tea Party guy. He's a good actor. He looked like, acted, spoke like their Tea Party guy. They said, oh, we've got a blue collar billionaire. Blue collar. They were looking for blue collar. So Donald Trump, as a good actor, gave them a blue collar figure, and they latched onto it. This is the Tea Party. And the Tea Party was an economic movement. Donald Trump, I think, has made an error in thinking, and same with the Democrats. They all want to point at the Trump because it benefits the system to say it's an individual, it's Trump, it's Putin, it's Assad. It's always an individual. It's never a country or anything like that. Your adversary is always an individual. Okay. But I think the Trump's mistake is, if let's say we start getting empty shelves and lots of problems, he thinks MAGA will stay with him no matter what, and they won't. This is the Tea Party. The Tea Party will revert back to their roots and say, we're angry about economic issues, and Donald Trump, doggone it, you're one of them. This was never about you. It was about our anger. You could point to some of the things the areas that they're going wrong and ideologically, sure. But again, it is an economic-based movement, and they'll cast Trump aside when they start feeling economic pain. I believe that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they will. And I just want to say one other thing. I mean, I completely agree with everything that you say. And I add that, there is a sense in which, we talk about neoliberalism and the neoliberal policies that have been pursued over, and Trump simply represents a new stage in the history of neoliberalism. He's not anti-neoliberal at all. He's totally pro-neoliberal in the following sense, that neoliberalism has always been about promoting the interest of the big corporations. And as this process has gone, then this has been happening now for 4.5 decades. As this process has gone on and on and on, what has happened is that the small capitalists have become disaffected. They are getting shafted. The petty capitalists and the small capitalists are being shafted. So although Trump claims to talk about Main Street against Wall Street, in reality, he's not. He's not, in fact, looking after the interests of Main Street. He is concerned chiefly about the interests of the big corporations, among whom Wall Street corporations are very important. So he is still talking about Wall Street. And what he wants to do for Wall Street basically is to roll back even the modicum of regulation that was imposed after 2008. So and deregulate even further with this crypto stuff and what have you. So this he wants to push through the most extreme forms of financial deregulation that you will see, the most extreme forms of other forms of deregulation, whether they are environmental or DEI related or what have you. He's going to roll them all back and thereby serve his corporate masters, who have, after all, bankrolled him to victory.
I certainly agree with a lot of that. We could have a long discussion on DEI and identity politics, and my thoughts on how that whole identity politics things. I have some big problems, huge problems with the identity politics stuff. But at any rate, as we continue on economics. I had something really important to say about the the thing about the neoliberal version of Trump, to me, it's this. Part of it is you've got the um, financial capitalist factional, the financial capitalist versus the industrial capitalist, and they come together in some areas. In some areas, they're fighting, and I think Trump just represents a bit of a factional. I won't even call it a battle. I'll call it friction between the industrial capitalist and the financial capitalist. But it both comes back to something that Reagan said, and that was this term that and no one ever looked at the converse of it. Supply side economics, right? But what people didn't think of is what is the opposite. Everybody's like, supply side, it sounds great. Supply side, supply, it sounds new, it sounds innovative, it sounds cool. Supply side is a way of saying neoliberalism. We're going to look out for the rich. But they didn't think about the opposite, which was, let's say, you could argue Keynesianism, et cetera, which was what? Demand side. The opposite is demand side. So what they're saying is we put money into the people, the rich, who are creating the job that, they came up with a whole new lexicon, the commands, the supply side, job creators, all that kind of stuff. That's where we're going to put the money, as opposed to demand side, which is the working class. It was a way of saying the money no longer goes to the working class. We're going to give the money to the rich, the innovators, all of these terms that sounded positive, in a way to say, give the money to the rich. And somehow, magically, mysteriously, they'll do the right thing, even though it's not the right thing. Just the natural organic course of them doing the things that they do will benefit everyone. And I've always argued, if you went to the Middle Ages, where the peasants were illiterate, and you said to illiterate peasants, hey, we got a plan to make your life better. What? We're going to give more gold to the noble class. They'd have laughed you out of there, or probably hacked you up with what little farming tools they had. But in America today, we can convince people that giving more money to the nobility is going to make their lives better. Everyday working people are like, yes, I'm all for that. Give more money to the rich. It's amazing.
That is, you are so right, and that's exactly how I think about it. Or in substance, I mean, I didn't arrive at it to quite the route that you did. A very nice distinction between supply side and demand side economics. Absolutely right, and so thanks for that. But exactly what Trump has done is he has made. They used to say about Mrs. Thatcher that she said that she was going to win the hearts and minds of people, and she never did. I mean, ordinary people. At least not under her, they did not actually liberal free market thinking that sheep was peddling. But by now, somehow, by the sheer, we are now, as I say, alongside neoliberalism, we are now living through an era of 4.5 decades of unrelenting discrediting of seriously left-wing politics, not, as you rightly say, not DEI and all that, which is being called socialism today, but seriously left-wing politics, which cares about the working classes, which cares even about the petty bourgeoisie. Why not? I mean, they're not exactly that much above working people and so on, and they work themselves, often they work themselves to the bone. So they don't care about any of these people. But somehow, because of the unrelenting attack on the left, the public has become credulous towards the completely absurd point that you're pointing to, that their situation will become better off if their employers are given tax breaks. I mean, tax rates are already historically low. I mean,
they pay none. Most of them pay zero.
With creative accounting.
Lower than that.
But even the tax rates, I mean, the official tax rates are at bottom, whereas in fact, the official tax rates used to be at like 80 and 90% back in the 50s and 60s for certain levels of income. You never see that sort of taxation anymore. And, sure, I mean, taxing the very rich may not yield much, but quite frankly, no, I mean, it will yield a lot, but, at the end of the day, we all have to pull together and pay for the services that we need. That may be true, but that's only if we have jobs. And precisely because neoliberalism has not solved the demand problem, but rather exacerbated, go back to the 1970s and the crisis to which neoliberalism was supposed to be the solution. It was a crisis of stagflation. There was a slowdown in investment, slowdown in job creation, along with high inflation. The two were not generally regarded as going together, and they were now going together. So we got a new term, stagflation, etc. at that time, one of the causes of the crisis was that at a world level, so, taking the system as a whole, demand was saturated. Existing demand was filled, and further job creation would require expanding that demand. So instead of expanding that demand, you basically are giving money to rich people. Expanding demand requires you to put money in the pockets of ordinary people who need things. And no sooner is that money put there or in their bank accounts, it will go out again to buy this or that, school books for the kids or whatever, shoes or furniture or whatever that a working family invariably needs year, day in and day out. So that would have actually been provided an enormous stimulus for investment and such like things, and this was not done. So what happens now is that we allow these corporations to pay piddly wages, accumulate huge profits, and what do they do with their profits? They don't invest them productively. They put it in the stock market. They put it in financial investments and so on. And, the word investment is funny because we use it to denote somebody creating a new mill or factory or farm. And we also use it to denote somebody who's playing on the stock market. I mean, the latter has no social use whatsoever.
And in a financialized, the bottom line is, though, they're getting exactly what they want, because in a financialized economy, putting hands in the hands of the investor class means they'll put it back in the hands of the speculator class, which are also the investor class. So the money just goes into an endless loop. So they say, but if we put more money in the hands of this company, this blah, 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 they'll have more money to invest. In the traditional view of capitalism, that meant research and development, coming up with new products, building something new, doing things that would be productive in the economy. In the traditional view of capitalism, in neoliberal capitalism, which one could argue that was the ultimate fate of traditional capitalism anyway. But now investing means I buy back my own stock to increase the value of the stock. So now you say, we're going to give this chip company, the CHIPS Act, $550 billion. We're going to give this chip company $50 billion so they can create chips to compete with Taiwan, China, whoever the hell, whatever, right? Okay, here's your $50 billion, Garland's chip company, go for it. And we say, great. What are you going to do with that? We're going to buy back our own stock. Why? Because then we'll make a fortune. Can we get another 50 billion?
And that reminds me, another really interesting feature of this late stage neoliberalism is that, it used to be said, Mrs. Thatcher said that she was going to create a property owning democracy, which meant, people own their own homes. So, she did that fire sale of council houses and all that. But at the same time, she also thought of a share owning democracy. So everybody would own shares of companies and so on. But in reality, what has happened is that over time, you refer to share buybacks. Companies are actually reducing the amount of equity that is out there for ordinary investors to buy. Like, if the ordinary Joe and Jane says, okay, let me invest in this company or that, there are actually fewer shares to buy. And the rise of private equity, where the juiciest investment opportunities, the most lucrative investment opportunities, become the preserve of a network of essentially private investors who do not issue shares to the public. And of course, along with this, you also, because if you are a publicly listed company, you also have to release your annual report every year. You have to account for everything. You have to publish your accounts, all of that. All of that accountability is now out the window. Public accountability. So we have a very peculiar type of situation in which, even like today, even the early dreams of neoliberalism seem naive compared to what's going on today.
Yes. Well, thank you very much. We're right at about an hour, and I really enjoyed it. And hopefully we can get together again in another week or so. I know you're very, very busy, but I'll send you a request, according to your schedule. But I really enjoy our discussions. They're very enlightening. They're very inspiring, I might add also. So thank you very much. And tell everyone where they can find you online.
Thanks very much. Sorry, my dog was barking, so I muted myself. Bye-bye with all the barks.
Yes. All right. Thank you very much. And we'll talk again soon.
Bye.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. Oh, do you have that's Dr. Radhika Desai. And sorry about that. We had some issues, coming out of London. She's in London with a bit of the audio. So I'll have to listen later. I hope it wasn't too much that, that people couldn't handle it. But she's really brilliant. And I really enjoy discussions with her. They're very, very productive, particularly about neoliberalism, etc. Yeah, you are correct. I think it could be Mike related. That did very much. Apparently, who was it? David King said she needs a mic. Yeah, I think that sounded mic related, because I had some microphone issues that did that in the past. And of course, Andre Martianov had some mic issues. So sometimes that's it. But thanks a lot, everybody. Share this on all your social media platforms. Follow me on Rumble, follow me on Rockfan. And if you can afford it, buy me a coffee or two, as Andre Martianov says. Follow me on Substack. I've got my P.O. box if you want to mail something, and certainly if you want to, if you're able, Patreon, whatever the case may be, to contribute. If not, just follow me on all your social media platforms and share this everywhere. I'm out.